You're standing inside a low wooden house as wind howls outside, snow pressing down from above, and yet you notice something strange. Your ears aren't ringing with the roar of the storm. The roof above you feels alive, heavy and quiet, like it's swallowing the Arctic itself. You start to wonder how people survived winters that could kill in hours, without modern insulation, without heaters, without noise leaking every ounce of warmth away. So here's the question you can't ignore. What did Viking families know about roofs that let them live through centuries of frozen darkness, while entire settlements elsewhere failed? You're not looking at a miracle or brute strength. You're looking at a silent design choice that turned nature against itself. As you imagine embers glowing softly and breath fogging the air, you begin to realize this roof wasn't just shelter. It was a system, a secret layered overhead that trapped heat, muted sound, and resisted wind in ways modern homes still struggle to copy. This is where survival stopped being about fighting winter and started becoming about cooperating with it. And once you see how this roof worked, you won't look at insulation, noise, or even comfort the same way again. Because what seems primitive at first glance turns out to be shockingly sophisticated. Now imagine living here for months without seeing the sun, knowing that one cracked beam or poorly sealed roof could mean frostbite, hunger, or death. For Viking and Arctic families, your roof wasn't an afterthought. It was the difference between life continuing or ending quietly in the night. Timber was scarce, metal was precious, and imported materials were impossible, so every decision had to work perfectly with what surrounded you. Wind didn't just chill the air, it ripped heat straight out of badly built homes. Snow piled high enough to crush weak structures. And noise mattered too, because sound meant movement, and movement meant heat escaping. In that reality, you couldn't afford roofs that echoed storms or rattled under pressure. You needed something dense, heavy, and forgiving. This is where the lived reality shapes the design. You cut turf from the land itself, stacked layers of earth and grass, and used birch bark as a hidden skin to shed water. Each family learned through harsh trial what failed and what endured. When a roof collapsed or leaked, it wasn't an inconvenience, it was a lesson paid for in suffering. Over generations, those lessons hardened into tradition, quietly passed down without explanation, because when something keeps your children alive, you don't argue with it. So imagine this step by step, because this is where it changes from folklore into engineering. First, you frame the roof low and steep enough to shed excess snow, but strong enough to hold weight. Then comes the clever part. You lay sheets of birch bark directly over the wooden boards. Birch bark isn't decoration. It's naturally waterproof, flexible, and rot-resistant. On top of that, you stack thick layers of sod, grass side down, soil packed tight. The weight compresses everything beneath it, sealing gaps you didn't even know existed. As the grass takes root, the roof becomes a living blanket. Here's the silent trick. Air trapped inside the soil layers acts as insulation, while the sheer mass dampens vibration and sound. Wind hits the roof and dies there, absorbed instead of echoed. Heat from the hearth rises, meets this dense ceiling, and stays inside instead of bleeding into the sky. Moisture that would normally rot wood is regulated by the breathable layers, drying slowly instead of condensing. You're not fighting physics, you're guiding it. Every layer has a job, and none of it relies on precision tools or chemicals. its simple materials arranged in the only order that worked. This system worked because it understood something modern builders often forget. Mass matters as much as material. The Viking roof didn't rely on thin barriers or trapped plastic air pockets. It relied on weight, moisture balance, and time. Soil stabilizes temperature, keeping heat in during winter and preventing overheating in summer. The living grass layer repairs itself, sealing cracks as roots grow and die. Birch bark swells when wet, tightening seams instead of opening them. Even the silence mattered, because a quiet house loses less heat through vibration and air movement. You're seeing overlooked logic born from watching failures up close. Vikings didn't calculate our values, but they understood outcomes. If a roof stayed warm, quiet and dry year after year, it earned trust. This is why some of these structures lasted centuries, long after iron tools rusted away. The design wasn't flashy, but it was resilient. It adapted as materials shifted, as families moved, as climates changed. And because it used local resources, it could always be rebuilt. The roof wasn't separate from the land. It was the land, lifted slightly overhead and persuaded to protect the people beneath it. So why did this disappear? Not because it stopped working, but because the world stopped valuing what it offered. As industrial materials arrived, speed replaced patience. Tin, shingles and later concrete promised convenience and uniformity. Cities demanded lighter roofs, taller buildings, and standardized codes that didn't know how to measure silence or thermal mass. Living roofs were seen as backward, messy, even dangerous. Fire risk, maintenance concerns, and unfamiliarity pushed them aside. Then modern heating arrived, masking inefficiency with fuel. You no longer needed the roof to do the hard work, because oil and electricity would do it for you. Over time, the knowledge faded, surviving only in remote regions, where it never made sense to abandon it. What once evolved through survival became a curiosity in museums and textbooks. The irony is that nothing truly replaced its full function. Modern roofs became louder, thinner, and more dependent on constant energy input. The Viking roof didn't fail. It was outpaced by a culture obsessed with speed and separation from nature, even when that separation quietly made homes weaker. Now you're living in a world worried about energy costs, climate extremes, and fragile supply chains, and suddenly this old roof doesn't feel old at all. Modern architects are rediscovering green roofs, thermal mass and passive heating, often reinventing ideas Viking families already mastered. When you think about silence, insulation and resilience together, you start to see how much we lost by forgetting this approach. This isn't about copying turf houses exactly. It's about remembering that buildings can cooperate with their environment instead of resisting it. The Viking roof reminds you that durability comes from understanding systems, not just buying stronger materials. As storms grow louder and winters more unpredictable, the quiet logic overhead starts to matter again. And maybe the real lesson isn't hidden in grass and soil, but in the mindset that built with patience, observation, and respect for limits. If you look up at your own ceiling tonight, you might ask yourself whether it's working as hard as it could be, and whether the future might depend on listening to the past a little more closely.